Welcome everybody. Are you ready for another Bible story? Well, we're going back to primary today, and I will try to get a title up here for you. And hope I get it right, because with this case you can't correct it. It's either done or none. Well, you got that line so far, don't you? How to live? Now, I've got somebody here with me. If I don't have something spelled right, they'll tell me. So, is it right? Oh, okay, we got it. So, how to live forever. Isn't that an interesting subject? How many times do we read accounts of people looking for the fountain of youth or some other way that they could live forever? Well, I don't know that I would want to do that, but that's what the seemingly people have always looked for, is how to live forever. Well, first place you got to start life, right? Before you can worry about living forever, you got to first get started. And this is what we're going to talk about today with, let's see, Adam and Eve. He was the first man created. And then later, God gave him a wife, and he named her Eve. And what do you suppose he fixed for them to live? You see, he had to prepare a place for them, didn't he? And God did prepare a place for them. It's a place all of us would like to have, right? So he prepared them a place that today you and I would call it a real paradise, wouldn't we? Because everything was there that they needed, and God planted a garden for them even, and wanted Adam to look after the garden and things like that. And so it was a beautiful, wonderful place. And as far as I know, God designed Adam to live forever. As far as I know, Adam was never expected to die. In fact, God had provided a tree in the garden and had told Adam, if you'll eat from that tree, you could live forever. But he said, there is another tree there. He said, whatever you do, don't eat from that tree. Because the day you eat from that tree, you will die. And I don't know if Adam even understood what death was at the time, but he was told not to eat from that tree. Well, I don't know if he told Eve not to eat from that tree or not, but as it ended up, there was the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. You see, they were innocent then. They had no idea what wicked was, what evil was, what was wrong and what was right. They just was there. And God was giving them life as long as they ate from that. But one day, the Satan, and a lot of people don't believe it's Satan, but he is a real character. Anyway, he was in the garden and he seen Eve. And he said to her, can you eat anything you want here in the garden? She said, oh, yeah, all but that one tree, and we're not supposed to even touch that one. He said, you kidding me? That looks like a good tree. Had her looking it over, and she looked at it. It looked good, smelled good, and all those things. And he said, God don't want you to eat from that one because he's afraid you're going to be just like he is. If you eat from that garden, you'll be just as smart as God. So she ended up looking it over a little bit better and tasted it. And Adam was somewhere near, and she said, Adam, come here, taste this. What should Adam do? He's got to make a decision, but I don't think he took time to think, because his wife, by the way, they were male and female. All creation was at that time. And so he said, isn't that what God told us not to eat of? Oh, yeah, but it is so good. Here, you got to try it. And so guess what Adam did? He tried it. Now, the way the Bible reads, that God would come into the garden, his voice would at least, they'd hear his voice walking in the garden. And I really believe that's the reason he created mankind to begin with, is so he could have fellowship and delight in that kind of fellowship. And so normally he'd come into the garden and they'd hear him at least, and And they'd evidently have fellowship together, and evidently Adam looked forward to that and expecting God to come at any time. But now that they took from that tree, their eyes were opened. And all this time, and I have no idea how long it was, all this time they were in there, they were totally naked. And that was fine. No problem at all. But now that their eyes are opened, they knew that was wrong and they were ashamed. And they didn't really care to have God see them now. And so, you know what they did? They hid among the trees. And I don't even know how to show that because they were hiding among the trees somewhere. And God came to the garden to see Adam. He couldn't see him. Now God obviously knew it, but he finally ends up, Adam, where are you, Adam? Finally, Adam said, here I am. I don't think he was at all anxious to see God, do you? I wouldn't be. Because you see, the thing was, when that all came down on them, they had this terrible sense of guilt. They were guilty, guilty, guilty. And do you think they felt good? I think there was not a doubt they were ashamed. They were so ashamed of themselves. They were guilty. They had disobeyed God. And that don't sound like a major transaction, does it? Don't sound like a major deal. But before God, I mentioned earlier in one of the meetings that my dad was kind of a stern guy. If he caught you telling a lie, which you knew not to do, you're in trouble. And he had a pretty stern hand. What he said, he meant. And God is like that too. God isn't just funning with us. He meant what he said. And those people were hiding from him because they had guilt in their hearts. And not only that, because they knew God well enough to know that he would deal with them. And they were afraid. And you know, we don't understand much about the fear of God today, do we? But God is a just God. God will do what he says. And if you'll do what he says, he can bless you. But if you don't do what he says, then we live with guilt and fear. All those things hang on us. And shame. Shame comes upon us. And I don't know how many people that I've listened to their testimony, and they tell how they felt apart from God. Once they knew about God, then they had guilt, fear, and shame came upon them. And so what did God promise them? He made a promise to them, didn't he? And you got to remember, when God says something, he means it. And so because of their disobedience, they had something else they had to do. I don't know about your house, but there was always a penalty for disobedience. And I guess there's probably a lot of kids today that they get their penalty. And as I understand it, some of the penalty today is to take their cell phone away from them. Things like that. Kids really, they don't want that to happen. They want that cell phone. But now they had a penalty. And what God did was, God put them out of the garden because of their disobedience and changed everything. No longer were they living in where the tree of life was. No longer were they living where there was just free food hanging by the bushelful up there to help yourself to. No longer did they have all those things. Everything had totally changed, and nothing was the same again. Nothing was the same. And so when Adam and Eve faced the trial they were in, they found out that God had done something really special to them. And I'm not able to do this very good, but God built a fence, or put a fence around the garden, and told them they could never go back into that garden. What a terrible place and thing that would be. They couldn't go back to where they loved so much, where they had enjoyed life up to that point, and they were forbidden to ever go back to there again. No tree of life, nothing. All this stuff they were forbidden, could no longer be there. could no longer be there and enjoy the fruit and all that stuff. And as far as I know, up to that time, even animals were domestic. But because of the sin, all of a sudden it changed. You see, Adam and Eve could only eat the fruit there in the garden. And, you know, God was so strict about this, he even put a gate there. But in that gate, they were forbidden to ever enter that place. So they couldn't do it. In fact, it says, and I can't do this really, but God put a cherubim or something there with a two-edged sword and pointing to keep them, that they could never ever go into that garden again. Never again would they be allowed to go in there. And that's where the tree of life was. So guess what? From that point on, they were destined for death. And death came into this world. And since then, every creature has gone through this process called death. Animals, they're brutal, kill each other, all that kind of stuff. And so here they are in this place. No longer could they be there to enjoy that stuff. But the Bible says that God told them that they would have to work by the sweat of their brow. And for you ladies, for Eve, what it meant to her, she would have pain at childbirth. Giving birth to a child would be a painful experience. Does that sound good to you? But it was all as a result of disobeying God. That's all it takes. And that's God's law, and it is a fixed law. You disobey God, death is the answer. Separation from God throughout eternity. And there's nobody that wants that to happen. But God made them a promise. You know what that promise was? That he was going to send somebody that could rescue them.